Welcome back to Imagineer of the Month, the new unscripted series where I dive into Imagineers' careers, past or present, to highlight their contributions to Disney parks and Disney experiences that we know and love around the world. This is episode 2, so after you watch this one, I highly suggest, if you haven't already, checking out episode 1, where I talked about Chris Beatty, one of my all-time favorite Imagineers, a current portfolio executive creative director at Walt Disney Imagineering, overseeing every project coming to Walt Disney World right now over the next 5 years. And in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about another executive creative director, but this time specifically for music, and that is John Dennis, also one of my all-time favorite Imagineers, who has been at Walt Disney Imagineering since 1990. So Mr. Dennis has been working at Imagineering, creating all of the music that we know and love for these experiences around the world, from the parks to the cruise line. And I figured that as I'm starting out the series, that Mr. Dennis would be one of the perfect Imagineers to highlight, with how many experiences that I love personally, and probably things that you guys love too that you're just not aware of, that he has had a hand in creating. So, who is John Dennis, and why do I want to talk about him? Well, I just teased it, but let's dive into it more. So, with that being said, let's get to it. If you think all the way back to 1955, when Walt Disney's original Disneyland opened and is about to celebrate its 70th anniversary, which is crazy to think about that that's coming up, but how big of a role that music plays at the parks, to when you're walking down Main Street, to when you're on Haunted Mansion, to the fireworks, the nighttime spectaculars. Music plays a part in just about everything when it comes to a Disney parks experience, and I don't think that many people realize how many people at Imagineering actually work on just music. John Dennis being one of those top people, and that's why I really want to talk about him, because he's worked on so many incredible things. And as I'm talking to all of you right now, Disney has officially confirmed that they have more projects in development at any point in the company's history over the next 5 years, which is pretty fascinating to think about when you think about Walt Disney World, with the amount of expansion and growth that we're having out here, to Disneyland's 70th and Disneyland Forward, and then overseas you have Hong Kong Disneyland's 20th, the expansion of the Disney Cruise Line fleet. With all of these new experiences, you have new music. And there's so many Imagineers right now working on those things, and in the future I will be talking about more of these specific people. But I think that John Dennis is the first one that I want to start off with. Also, just the fact that when you have these creative directors, you know, I think that me personally, I'm a little bit guilty of this. A lot of the time I have talked about the actual Imagineers coming up with the story for these rides, like Ted Robledo, for example, who worked on the Fantasyland expansion in Tokyo and Tiana's Bayou Adventure, and then the Imagineers that work on bringing that creative vision to life. But at the same time, on the other hand, I could say that those stories don't have the impact that they do without the music that directly aligns with that story. Because if you have a story and the music doesn't align, well, it's not going to create the emotion in the guest that's experiencing that story, and then your attraction has failed. So, well, the story is obviously incredibly important, and you really can't start building the music until that story is set in stone. You also have to nail the music so that you have a successful attraction, a successful nighttime spectacular, whatever it may be. And I've mentioned it already, but John Dennis's resume and everything he's worked on is just ridiculous. And I'd almost bet on the fact that all of you watching this right now have experienced something that he worked on over his 35-year and counting career, but you probably didn't realize it until you watched this video. I think it's appropriate to kind of start with John Dennis's career at the beginning, because, well, now he's an executive creative director of music. You know, in 1990, when he first started, he wasn't this high up. And he started his career as a production assistant on Le Visionarium, a Circle Vision film over at Disneyland Paris. He also worked as a post-production and sound coordinator on Honey, I Shrunk the Audience and Ellen's Energy Adventure over at Epcot. And then about a decade later, in 1999, Mr. Dennis was promoted to a music and audio production supervisor, working on music and audio production for theme park films, and then he later worked on Rock and Roller Coaster starring Aerosmith at Disney's Hollywood Studios. So when I'm looking at this, my mind immediately goes to how attractions that he worked on at the beginning are now changing. Because, like I mentioned, he worked on Ellen's Energy Adventure. Well, he was one of the main people who worked on the music for Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind over at Epcot. And that's undoubtedly one of the most popular, beloved, well-respected attractions Disney has ever created. So he worked on the original ride and then the ride that replaced it. And also the fact with Rock and Roller Coaster, right? We are seeing Rock and Roller Coaster soon. It's going to be reimagined to feature the Muppets and music stars. So as Disney is right now working on this Muppets ride, the first ever Muppets ride, which is pretty cool to think about, even though it is sad that we are losing Muppet Vision 3D, there's no denying that. I do have hope that when Disney is saying that this Muppets ride is going to have music stars, right? No one's talking about this, but this isn't just the Muppets taking over Rock and Roller Coaster. We're going to have some actual music stars come in here, and that's kind of similar to what we saw with Cosmic Rewind, where you have that awesome mix. So the fact that that was such a success, kind of bring in those ideas and make it even better for this reimagining of Rock and Roller Coaster. I mean, Rock and Roller Coaster as we have it now is incredible, but I do have hope that he's going to be working on this Muppets thing, so there's a little bit of full circle moments here because he's been with Imagineering for so long, which I think is really, really cool. And then in 2001, he was promoted again to be a director of music production. He oversaw the music for all of Disney California Adventure Park, including Soarin' Over California. Again, think about how iconic the theme is for Soarin' Over California. He was involved with it. Then he produced music for Tokyo Disney Sea, Storm Rider, and the Magic Lamp Theater. Then he shifted to the entirety of Walt Disney Studios Park at Disneyland Paris and was responsible for the music of each of the park's attractions. Now, I'm going to keep the theme going here. You look over to Paris right now, we have a groundbreaking e-ticket for The Lion King. Would it make sense that the man that was involved with all of the music for this park when it first opened is going to be involved with this Disney Adventure World transformation in The Lion King? You would hope so. So something to think about as all of these projects are underway right now. And then he also worked on One Man's Dream over at Disney's Hollywood Studios, and also worked on the 50th anniversary concert for Disneyland at the Hollywood Bowl. So like even stepping outside of the parks, but still having a tie-in to the parks. So that's like a little bit of history before he got to his role now as the executive creative director of music. But he has worked on so many things in recent years that are just so impressive. I already mentioned one, Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind. Also the Disney Wish and the Disney Treasure, the newest ships in the Disney Cruise Line fleet, and then hopefully the Disney Adventure and the Disney Destiny debuting later this year. That's not confirmed yet, but just a little bit of speculation on my end. He also worked on Tokyo Disneyland's expansion with Enchanted Tale of Beauty and the Beast, and like I mentioned, Ted Robledo, one of my favorite Imagineers too. All of my favorites are the ones that I talk about, but Ted would work on the story for these rides, and then you have John come in. They also worked on Tiana's Bayou Adventure. And say what you want to say about Tiana's Bayou Adventure, but the music is top notch. So it is cool that two of my favorites worked over there. And just how incredible Enchanted Tale of Beauty and the Beast is. I feel like that's one of the best attractions in the world, from the castle itself to the ride, the scale. It's just incredible. I gotta get out there one day to go on that one. Also, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge as a whole, with the land itself, Rise of the Resistance, and Smuggler's Run. And there is a fun story there that I don't think many people know, that originally John Williams didn't want to come back on to create that original Galaxy's Edge theme, because he said that there's already so much Star Wars music out there. If you guys are making a Star Wars land, why can't you just use the music I've already composed and created? But Disney, you know, they're telling that original story with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, and thankfully Dennis was one of the people who helped convince Williams to come back on board, because that iconic theme for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge feels very classic Star Wars, even though it's less than 10 years old. So fun story there, one of my favorites actually with John's career. Also, Pandora, the world of Avatar. over at Animal Kingdom. And again, you have Pandora also coming to Disney California Adventure. So I think that there's just so many projects that are under his belt that kind of directly correlate to what we're seeing right now. And that's why I'm talking about that so much, because it's just fascinating to think about. You know, I'm talking to all of you guys right now in early 2025, but in a few years now, we could look back on this video and see all of this new music coming to life, but we don't know that yet. So something to look back on in the future. And then for me personally, I think that the big one that I really love is Fantasy Springs over at Tokyo Disney Sea, which also just recently opened last summer, because Fantasy Springs at Tokyo Disney Sea has that original song, which I think is amazing that Disney actually put the effort into creating an original song for that 8th themed port over at that park, and just how they incorporated the songs that we know and love from those Walt Disney Animation Studios films, like with Tangled and Frozen and Peter Pan, and then they added something original, which makes it kind of stand on its own. That's also a big part of what I love with Tiana's Bayou Adventure with Special Spice, where you're telling an original story, and just like Splash Mountain had with Zippity Doo-Dah, which so many people still love to this day, myself included, then you kind of carry on that legacy in a sense with an original song. So I really hope that, you know, with some of these new projects, we see original music and original renditions of things that we already know and love, which I think is pretty cool. And I also have to mention, you know, Epcot, right? When you think about Epcot, one of the big things that I loved about Epcot when I was younger, when I was a teenager, is Future World and Innoventions with that iconic music. I mean, I think that probably my favorite part of Epcot was walking into the park and seeing the Fountain of Nations with all of that music. And while I do miss it, you know, I can't deny that I love that new Epcot theme with Pinar Toprak, and John Dennis was involved with that as well. So kind of that whole Epcot transformation with Cosmic Rewind and that new theme. So, I mean, I could dive much deeper into his career, but I think you guys can kind of see why I wanted to highlight John Dennis with music, because he's had his hand in so many things, from, you know, the launch of California Adventure and Walt Disney Studios Park, which is being transitioned to Disney Adventure World right now, to, you know, things that we're just seeing open in recent years that are already kind of feeling timeless because of how timeless those properties are, like Beauty and the Beast and Star Wars. And then you just add some incredible music to that, and it's gonna make it such a more emotional experience to where you want to go back on it. For me personally, John Dennis is at the top of my list of Imagineers because he's been around for so long, so he has so much wisdom and expertise and knowledge, and he's just a cool person. I was fortunate enough to meet him at the Tiana's D23 Gold Member event, and he was just so kind. He talked to me for a few minutes, and he's just a very personable person. So at the end of the day, while these Imagineers are doing incredible things and they're impacting millions of lives over decades with generations of families experiencing their work, if you just appreciate what they do and talk to them, that's one of my favorite things to do as a creator, because they don't just happen. You know, there are people behind the scenes working on these things. So that's why I wanted to highlight John Dennis. And I would encourage you guys, for all the projects like I've talked about with, you know, Cruise Line and Tokyo and Walt Disney World and Disneyland, I would encourage you guys to actually look into these projects a little bit more and maybe even find more details that I didn't talk about for things that people have worked on that made these things a reality, and things that no one's going to talk about. There are so many stories and information and facts about these things that just don't get highlighted, which I think is very sad, because if someone put the effort into that, then it was done for a reason, right? And if we aren't appreciating that, well then what's the point of them doing it? So I always do my best to appreciate these things, but let me know in the comments down below, were you guys aware of these projects that John Dennis worked on, or did this video make you aware of them? Curious on that front. But for all of you who watched to the end, I very much appreciate it, and I will see you all in my next episode of Imagineer of the Month.